The idea behind this 3-part video series is simple, but of course, I had to make it more complicated than it ever needed to be. What's the best way to go about countering and defeating each Phantom Troupe member? Well, to properly answer that in a way in keeping with the channel's name, let's lay down the many ground rules of these hypotheticals. First, imagine that the premise of each matchup that will follow is a situation similar to when Moral went against Cheetu, failed to capture him, and decided to call on his friend Like to deal with the speed-brained jackass. Since Like's ability, whatever it was, would have been a great matchup for the flat-headed furry. As such, this is a situation where our hypothetical hunter, or Nen-using mercenary, has perfect information on the Phantom Troupe member and was selected to go against them on the grounds of their ability and skill set being an excellent counter against the troupe member in question. On the other, much more unfair hand, the troupe member has no information on their opponent. Second, to keep things interesting, I won't be considering assassinations, i.e. situations where one party doesn't even know they're engaged in combat. Otherwise, this would turn into a game of Zoldyck roulette. This means that both parties can recognize each other as their opponents and the fact that a fight is imminent. Third, so as to again keep things fun, we'll say that the hypothetical challenger at most has minimal prep time. As in, maybe they caught their target's trail in a neutral environment and are moving to engage them, thus having the initiative advantage. Maybe they're on a time frame or something. Fourth, no outside assistance for either combatant. Fifth, while the vast majority of troupe members wouldn't do this for various reasons, the option of escape is open and will be taken into consideration as an option for those that I deem may attempt it. Sixth, winning entails either killing or permanently incapacitating the opponent. Seventh, the hypothetical challenger won't be any specific character, but an imagined Nen user with a Hatsu and skill set that would serve as the most optimal counter against the troupe member in question. This also means that the hypothetical challenger is always on the same general level of skill and Nen proficiency as the troupe member they are going up against, but may be superior to them in terms of a certain attribute which can be expected from someone on that level of overall skill and Nen proficiency. As an example, it's entirely within expectations for an opponent on the same level of proficiency as Shizuku to be reasonably stronger than her, since Shizuku's strength isn't quite on par with, for example, her speed and overall Nen proficiency. As a counterexample, it's unreasonable to imagine someone on Uvogin's level of Nen proficiency being physically stronger or more durable than him. And eighth, I'll do my very best to always arm our hypothetical challenger with a Hatsu from a specific character we've seen. I'll resort to made up, but very much possible, Hatsu only if I really need to. With all that said and established, let's get into it. First, let's tackle Feitan Portor. Surprisingly, despite his stature, Feitan is in the upper moderate tier among the PT members when it comes to pure strength, being ranked 5th in arm wrestling. To get this out of the way immediately, as someone who's dabbled in amateur arm wrestling, I'm fully aware that it does not equate to either lifting strength or striking power in the real world. It's a skill like anything else, and someone who's trained in it will beat an opponent who isn't, unless the difference in sheer strength and size is substantial. However, A, I don't think anyone among the PT members is a professional arm wrestler, and B, I don't think Takashi-sensei is either or had given it that much thought. As such, I will be treating the arm wrestling rankings as direct analogs to each member's physical strength. Now, apart from being strong, Feitan is also incredibly dexterous and quick, with his speed and reflexes almost certainly being among the top 3 or 4 among the troupe. As you can see, he's quite the physical all-rounder, which does make sense, since his Hatsu isn't something to be used casually against any opponent in any context. Rising Sun allows Feitan to transmute his aura into heat, by focusing it in an emitted ball which bursts into a miniature sun, with the power and heat generated scaling with his level of injury and anger, thus making it into a counteractive type of ability. Scent transmuters are of course not immune to the properties and substances their aura mimics. Feitan also conjures Painpacker, a suit of armor which shields him from the scorching heat of Rising Sun. So, with perfect info, what's the best way to go about defeating Feitan? Now, I know what some of you are thinking, since I do remember seeing it mentioned at least once a few years back in a video's comment section. Knuckles damage negating Hakoware would be the perfect counter to Feitan's damage-dependent Rising Sun, wouldn't it? Yes, absolutely. Usually, I don't have a lot of good things to say about Hakoware when we're talking about 1v1 scenarios, but this is one of a few matchups where the ability can really shine. Its biggest weakness, the fact that an opponent still has full access to their Hatsu while affected by it, means that Hakoware is a win more ability. To be used against opponents, its user outclasses and can gradually either brawl or stall into bankruptcy. Stalling by running and hiding, while possible, wouldn't be ideal in this case, since Feitan's speed is his greatest asset, meaning that it'd be unreasonable for our hypothetical combatant to be significantly quicker than he is. However, the fact that Feitan's Hatsu is counteractive and requires of him to take damage prior to being used means that both him and our hypothetical Hakoware user are fighting on equal terms until such a time as bankruptcy is triggered. While that is a huge bonus, there is an issue. Since we're borrowing Knuckles' ability, we're also borrowing his category, i.e. Conjuration, and a combat proficient conjurer fighting an equally combat proficient transmuter would, under regular circumstances, gradually lose that exchange due to the transmuter's slight but meaningful superior affinity for enhancement. However, since no damage is being dealt and the only thing that's exchanged is aura, I do believe our hypothetical combatant would come out on top after a prolonged bout, since the 20% advantage in enhancement transmuters have over conjurers wouldn't be enough to offset Hakoware's compounding interest of 10% every 10 seconds. As such, for an ability like Hakoware to work against someone of Feitan's caliber and skill set, its user would need to be a physical powerhouse capable of matching Feitan in a prolonged duel. As said though, our imagined challenger should at least be able to just barely keep up with Feitan in a 1v1, since their physical stats and fighting prowess would be relatively similar. After all, both their Hatsu would encourage a focus on dueling capability and physical prowess, just for different reasons. Now, while running away and leaving the 50-meter radius would stop the debt accumulation, I'm pretty sure that when Feitan reaches a certain level of seething, there's no way he'll back down from a fight. And even if he were to regain his composure and attempt to run away, all our challenger would need to do is stay within a 50-meter radius of him, which shouldn't be too difficult even with Feitan's speed, since Hakoware also works as a tracking device. And while it's unreasonable to think our challenger can surpass Feitan in speed, it would be reasonable to assume he could match him. There's, more or less, your perfect counter. An end-user just barely capable of matching Feitan in a prolonged duel while using Hakoware. With that said though, Feitan is one of those characters who greatly suffers from opponents knowing his Hatsu. If you know what to expect, I'd genuinely argue it's fairly simple to avoid it. Just like the Troupe members watching his duel with Zazan did. Rising Sun needs time to rev up, and while he's doing that, an opponent could either go for the kill and risk getting deatomized due to the power of post-mortem seething, or just, fuck off. In the manga, Phinks didn't assist Kaluto in escaping from the inferno created by Rising Sun, meaning that he, despite being far below par for Phantom Troupe standards, nonetheless ran quickly enough to avoid the ability. I mean, Feitan's brain gets fried enough from seething so hard he starts talking in tongues. Talk about an obvious tell. This, paired with the fact that I very much doubt Feitan could emit such a powerful attack much farther from himself than he did against Zazan, considering his unimpressive 60% proficiency in emission, as well as his heavy net memory investment in transmutation, conjuration, and enhancement. As such, any opponent capable of getting Feitan to the level of injury Zazan did through the power of their pure combat prowess and or their Hatsu, whatever it may be, would win if given perfect info on our resident Hiei stand-in. From a PT heavy hitter, let's move on to the PT heavy hitter, namely Uvogin. Uvogin's as straightforward a fighter as they come. He's your prototypical, if not stereotypical, enhancer. The kind of fighter that prefers a no-holds-bar brawl, relying primarily on his endurance, durability, and sheer power when compared to Feitan's more cunning and speed-blitzy approach. The man was able to decimate 3 shadow beasts while paralyzed from the neck down. Need I say more? In terms of pure physical strength, he is the undisputed #1 among the troupe, which easily puts him in the top 5 physically strongest human characters we've seen in the series, and even that's me being a bit conservative. If you're attempting to overpower or outlast this mass monster, you're in for a rude awakening. How do you go about fighting him then? He can not only punch, but also yell, bite, and spit at you to death. Well, we were actually explicitly told about Uvo's bad matchups. Conjurers and manipulators with complex abilities. While an experienced combatant, Uvo was the kind of guy that preferred things to be, straightforward. While he did annihilate 3 shadow beasts while paralyzed from the neck down, A, his directness and overzealousness to fight are what got him into that situation in the first place, and B, leeches would have killed him eventually were it not for Shalnark's apparently expert knowledge of Hirudinia. After thinking on it though, I have to say that Uvo would either undoubtedly wreck or stand a very good chance of wrecking the majority of manipulators and conjurers seen in the series, as most of them simply wouldn't be able to handle Uvo's sheer power and durability. After all, Kortopi had an ability to actually, but only change jail is combat relevant, tailor-made for fighting the troupe, which your generic conjurer or manipulator would sadly lack. That said, what Krollo exactly meant when he said complex abilities is up for debate, since I personally think most complex abilities with complex activation conditions would crumble under Uvo's onslaught. However, I would argue that Uvo's straightforward, ball-to-the-wall fighting style definitely makes him susceptible to one-hit win abilities, such as Kortopi's Chain Jail, Shalnark's or Illumi's Needles, and Owl's Fun Cloth. If we ignore Kortopi, which of course we will, that'd be cheating, Uvo's hardest counter among the characters we've seen is most likely the newest addition to the Spiders, Illumi Zoldyck. While Uvo is used to taking hits, he would also be familiar with needle-based coercive manipulation, thanks to Shalnark, and would be sure to try and avoid them at all cost. But while Shal only has 2 needles at his disposal, Illumi has dozens. By the way, since I view him as being on a similar enough level to Uvo, this is one of the few scenarios where our hypothetical challenger can actually just be a character, namely Illumi. All Illumi would need to do is hit Uvo with a single needle out of the numerous he has, and Uvo, while quite capable of evading Kortopi's chain throughout their battle, would, I believe, very much struggle to avoid Illumi's barrage. This not only because Illumi is very close to Uvo's own experience and skill level, but also because I think dozens of needles flying at you from various directions would be significantly more difficult to keep track of and properly avoided than a chain would be. His tremendous height and bulk making him into a huge target wouldn't help either. Just imagine if Illumi could in his needles as well. At that point it would really be game over. Also, while he is an absolute physical specimen, as a head-on, bare-knuckle brawler more used to tanking than dodging attacks with no weapon to block the aura-infused needles with, it would only be a matter of time before one of them found their mark. And even if one isn't enough to bring Uvo down, it'd be a matter of time as soon as the first one hit. I would like to say though that even with an ability like Illumi's, someone of a, let's say Shalnark's caliber may not be able to actually pierce Uvo's tougher-than-steel skin. It would have to be someone on Illumi's and Uvo's level. In conclusion, any opponent with a one-hit win conditional ability like the ones previously mentioned would be an excellent counter to Uvo's brawl-focused fighting style. From the heaviest, let's move on to the lightest of hitters and try to counter our boy Kortopi. Kortopi is the physically weakest among the PT members, being ranked dead last in arm wrestling, making him either at or slightly below York New Gon in purely physical terms. Remember that Gon was just about able to beat Shizuku in arm wrestling while she was using her offhand, and Shizuku is one spot above Kortopi, so I do believe the comparison is quite apt. Don't get me wrong, Gon was a physical beast in his own right during the York New arc, but this is the Phantom Troupe we're talking about. The difference between him and the Troupe's heavier hitters at the time was literally the difference between a child and an adult. Furthermore, Kortopi's Hatsu, Gallery Fake, which allows him to copy-paste non-supernatural versions of anything he touches, which then also act as an extension of his N, has no direct combat application to speak of. Now, I'm not saying it can't be adapted and utilized for combat, but that's far from its intended purpose of creating perfect forgeries. However, what Gallery Fake can very much be optimized for is evading and escaping. As per this hypothetical, a PT member choosing escape and succeeding counts as a win-con for them. And if anyone would opt for it and be successful at it, it would be Kortopi. He had enough Nen output and skill to create as many as 50 copies of the Troupe's building-sized hideout, meaning that he could alter the landscape of a city block in an instant. And with each of those buildings serving as an extension of his N, he could keep tabs on his pursuer at all times, allowing him to eventually lose them and make his escape. So, how does one go about countering this slippery escape artist? Honestly, take your pick. An enhancer like Nobu and even Uvo could blitz him before he got off Gallery Fake. An emitter like Franklin could decimate him from afar by annihilating anything between him and Kortopi. A transmuter like Machi or Hisoka could attach their transmuted gum/threads respectively to Kortopi so as to not lose track of him. A fellow conjurer like Bonolenov would annihilate Kortopi and his conjured buildings with his Jupiter, and so on. Since he would significantly physically outstat Kortopi as long as our hypothetical combatant has a combat-focused Hatsu, Kortopi's a goner more often than not on that basis alone. Nonetheless, emitters, specifically those that utilize total transpositioning like Goreinu, matter phasing like Luini, or emit multiple Nen beasts like Razor, would probably be his worst matchups. Goreinu could just teleport Kortopi to him, Luini could phase through his buildings, thereby potentially even bypassing Kortopi's N, and Razor would cut off Kortopi's escape routes and slowly but surely surround and trap him. Kortopi's most impressive physical feat was keeping up with the other Troupe members while they were doing the PT equivalent of a casual jog. And as someone with super low physical stats and combat potential relative to his caliber of Nen mastery and proficiency, Kortopi would even struggle with the emitted Nen beasts to a degree almost no one in his proficiency bracket would, making him an easy target for our hypothetical combatant. Since we brought her up, let's now quickly counter Kortopi's partner in failing to hit the gym and fellow conjurer, Shizuku Murasaki. As established for PT standards, Shizuku is physically unimpressive to say the least. As far as her Nen beast of a vacuum cleaner Blinky is concerned, Blinky has the ability to suck in and store an unlimited number of non-living objects not created by Nen. Very useful for a thieving group like the Troupe, but very difficult to optimize for combat. Unlike with Kortopi though, we have actually seen her fight. Twice. Once when she ooga booga'd Bai's to death, and then when she just barely managed to defeat Pike by bludgeoning him and then draining away his blood. Even by her own admission, the only reason she defeated him was because he was too stupid to web shut the wounds she opened, with her having realized that fact only later. This means that had Pike been just a bit more combat savvy, he could have probably defeated Shizuku right then and there. This, as well as a few other scenes in the series, point to Shizuku being a bit of an airhead, and while she seems like a competent strategist, she isn't anywhere close to the likes of Chrollo or Hisoka, for example. Speaking of Hisoka, I like to think that it's her battle with Pike that made her realize Bungee Gum counters Blinky's bludgeon and blood-sucking strategy, since Hisoka would easily plug his wounds with it. This is supposing she'd even get a single hit in, which is optimistic. To get back on track, how would one go about countering Shizuku? I am not going to beat it around the bush. If Shizuku faces anyone at about her caliber with a Hatsu actually optimized for combat, she's a goner. While Blinky is combat capable, it's far from combat optimal, meaning that any opponent equal to her in terms of physical stats, net mastery, and strategic thinking, but with an actual combat optimal Hatsu, would eventually get the better of her. And unlike with Kortopi, whose Hatsu would give him a decent chance of retreating, Shizuku's Blinky couldn't. Finally, let's complete the FF set by covering Feitan's partner in crime and the man with the potential to be the heaviest of heavy hitters, Phinks Magcub. As an enhancer and the second physically strongest Phantom Troupe member, Phinks is a physical beast, overshadowed solely by Uvogin. Suffice to say that he's among the troupe's best physical all-rounders, as I suspect that while he may have been slightly weaker than Uvo, he was also at least that much faster. As an enhancer and hand-to-hand brawler, Uvo and his fighting styles are reasonably similar. Though where Uvo prefers to punch, eat, and spit his opponents to death, Phinks' usual MO is to play Twister with their necks. His Hatsu, Reaper Cyclotron, allows him to enhance his fist with every clockwise rotation of his arm, akin to some Looney Tunes shenanigans, and has the potential to be the strongest enhancement-based physical attack seen in the series. 15 rotations of his arm were enough for him to absolutely annihilate a rather bulky and seemingly durable Chimera Ant officer, with him even saying that half as many rotations would have been enough to do the job. While his ability does come down to a punch at the end of the day, the escalating power buildup is a breath of, if not fresh, at least less stale air, considering just how one-note enhancers tend to be. So, how does one go about countering Reaper Cyclotron? There are two basic ways to do it. A. Restrict Phinks' movement so he can't wind up his arm. For this, Hisoka's bungee gum or Machi's threads would work great. Or B. Don't give him the chance to rotate it, while preferably staying at long range. Franklin's double machine gun would be great for this, since Phinks would need to focus on either evading or blocking while Franklin slowly whittled him down. However, the absolute best way to counter an extremely powerful but telegraphed physical attack you know is coming is with an emission-based damage transference Hatsu, the likes of Terrabellum's Damage Sweet Home. All that damage would suddenly be transferred to Phinks, and would end up moderately injuring to outright killing him, depending on the number of rotations. While damage transfer would work against most physical-based fighters in general, it is especially powerful against brawl-type enhancers, who heavily telegraph their melee attacks, such as Gon and Phinks do, and less so against those like Nobunaga who rely on a weapon and therefore don't have to get into full melee range and make direct physical contact with their opponents. Since our hypothetical combatant would be an emitter, he'd have a solid grasp of enhancement, and would consequently be able to beat down Phinks, who'd now be injured and effectively Hatsu-less. And that's the end of part 1 of 3. Expect part 2 of the series to be out relatively soon. I hope I didn't bore you too much with the whole hypothetical challenger shtick, but I couldn't think of a better way to go about addressing each member's strengths and weaknesses while keeping things quote-unquote fair. I've been wanting to do a video like this for a while now, but couldn't think of a good enough format until our hypothetical challenger appeared. Though I have to say, considering how insanely geeky and niche my videos usually are, I am hoping this series will garner a more general appeal. By the way, if you've got any other ideas about how to counter the spiders I covered here, or have suggestions on how to counter the upcoming ones, do feel free to share. If I end up using an idea you mentioned, supposing I didn't already have it locked in, I'll be sure to credit you. With that said, first and foremost, I'd like to thank Kamaswami, Tom Gnome, Augustin, Nessan, and XGen8 for going the extra mile in supporting the channel. As always, thank you very much for watching, your feedback is always appreciated, subscribe if you'd like more content like this, and I'll see you in the next one.